Get your things and leave this place.
After all I did for him.
The champagne was still cold when he told her to leave. Elena stood in the doorway of the penthouse suite, his penthouse suite now, the one the deal had paid for before the ink was even dry, and watched 40 people she barely recognized raise their glasses to a man she had loved for 6 years. The chandelier threw gold light across the room. Somewhere a string quartet was playing something that sounded like triumph. And Daniel, in a suit she had picked out for him at a shop on Fifth Avenue 2 years ago when he couldn't afford it himself, wouldn't look at her. Daniel. She said his name quietly, the way you'd touch a bruise to see if it still hurt. He finally turned. His mother was at his elbow, her hand resting on his arm like a queen presenting her heir. Beside her stood Marcus, Daniel's best friend since college, his business partner, the man Elena had once helped move apartments in the rain because nobody else would. Marcus wasn't smiling. He was watching Elena the way a man watches a fire he started, waiting to see how far it would spread. "This isn't the time," Daniel said. "When is the time?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated that it did. Hated that after everything, after 6 years of covering rent when his freelance checks were late, after driving him to that first pitch meeting because his car had been repossessed, after sitting up with him until 3 a.m. rewriting his business plan line by line, after all of it, her voice still cracked in front of his mother. "You don't fit this anymore, Elena." His mother said it for him, the way she always did. "Look around you. This is a $55 million deal. Daniel is going to be on magazine covers next month. He needs someone who understands rooms like this, someone who was born for them." Elena felt something in her chest go very still, the way a house goes still right before a storm hits it. "Someone like her?" Elena asked, and turned her head toward the far end of the room, where a woman in a red dress was watching the scene unfold with the calm, patient interest of someone who already knew how it would end. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. "Get your things," he said finally. "I'll have someone send the rest." Have someone send the rest. 6 years, reduced to a delivery. She didn't cry in front of them. She wanted to, God, she wanted to, but some old instinct, something her father had drilled into her since she was a girl, without either of them ever discussing it directly, told her that dignity was the only thing in that room they couldn't take from her. So she picked up her small black purse, the one with the worn strap she'd refused to replace even though she could have bought the entire building it was stitched in, and she walked out past all of them, her heels echoing on marble that, though none of them knew it yet, her own family's foundation had quietly helped finance. Marcus caught her eye as she passed. For a half-second, something flickered there. Not triumph, not quite guilt either. Something closer to fear, as if some part of him already sensed that the ground beneath his feet was not as solid as he'd built it to seem. She didn't look back. But nobody in that room knew what was really happening. Nobody knew who Elena really was, or what she had done to make that $55 million deal exist in the first place. And before 48 hours had passed, every single person who had smiled at her humiliation would learn the truth, and it would change everything. To understand why Elena walked out of that room without a single tear, you have to go back. Not years, decades. She was born Elena Whitfield Marchetti, though almost no one in New York had ever heard the second half of that name spoken aloud in her adult life. Her grandfather had built a shipping and logistics empire from a single tugboat in Genoa. Her father had turned it into a name that appeared quietly on the letterhead of half the trade agreements signed on the East Coast. The kind of wealth that doesn't need to announce itself because everyone who matters already knows. But wealth had not made her childhood soft. Her mother died when Elena was 9, and her father, a brilliant, exhausted man who loved his daughter fiercely but had no idea how to say so, buried himself in work the way some men bury themselves in drink. Elena grew up in a mansion that echoed. She remembers sitting on the marble staircase at 11 years old, waiting for a father who came home at midnight, then left again before she woke, and deciding, in the private and merciless logic of a lonely child, that if people only wanted her for what her family had, she would simply stop letting them know what her family had. By 19, she had already run the experiment twice. A boyfriend in college who found out about the trust fund and proposed within a month. A friend in her sorority who'd befriended her the week her father's company made the news, then vanished the week it didn't. Each time, the same lesson, carved a little deeper. People don't love you. They love what you can give them. So when she moved to New York at 24, with a modest apartment, a job she didn't need, and a name she quietly clipped down to just Elena Marchetti, dropping Whitefield the way you'd drop a coat that made you too easy to spot in a crowd, it wasn't an accident. It was armor she had built, one disappointment at a time. She met Daniel at a laundromat on 9th Avenue, of all places, both of them waiting on machines that took too many quarters. He was funny in a self-deprecating way, sharp but not cruel, and utterly refreshingly unimpressed by anything about her, because he had no idea there was anything to be impressed by. He talked about his business idea with the kind of stubborn hope that only broke people or brave people ever have. Elena, who had spent her whole adult life being loved for the wrong reasons, fell for a man who loved her for none of the reasons that had ever mattered before. For 6 years, she kept the secret, not out of shame, out of hunger, a hunger to be wanted the ordinary way, the way people who have nothing are wanted, for their laugh, their loyalty, and how you remembered how you took your coffee. She let him believe she worked an unglamorous job in corporate communications. She let him believe her modest studio apartment, with its second-hand couch and the crack in the bathroom tile she never bothered to fix, was all she had. She let him pay for dinner on the nights he could afford it, and quietly, without ever telling him, covered the difference on the nights he couldn't, through channels he never traced, invoices adjusted, clerical errors in his favor that were never errors at all. She loved him plainly, and she loved him in secret, and for a long time, that was enough. What no one in that ballroom understood, what Daniel himself never fully understood, was exactly how much of his rise had her fingerprints on it, pressed so lightly he never once felt them. 3 years ago, Daniel's business had been circling the drain. 2 failed pitches, a landlord threatening eviction on the tiny office he shared with Marcus. Elena remembers the night he came home and sat on the edge of their bed, not crying, just staring at a wall, saying, "Maybe I'm just not built for this." She remembers making him tea he didn't drink and telling him with a steadiness she did not feel that he was. What she didn't tell him was that she spent that same night on the phone with her father for the first time in almost a year. "I need a favor," she told him, "and I need you to never tell anyone it came from me." Her father, who had learned over the years to stop asking why her daughter insisted on living like someone with nothing, arranged 3 introductions, quiet ones, a logistics contact here, a supplier discount there, nothing that would ever look like charity, nothing that would ever have her name attached. When Daniel landed his first real contract, he called her at midnight, breathless, certain it was luck. She let him believe it. For 3 years, that was the pattern. Elena worked, in total secrecy, as the invisible architecture beneath Daniel's success, vetting deals through unnamed consultants she quietly funded, smoothing over supplier disputes through connections Daniel never knew existed, once even personally guaranteeing a loan under a shell entity so obscure that the paperwork alone took a team of her father's lawyers 2 days to construct convincingly. And the $55 million deal, the one being toasted in gold light while she was told to leave, had not found Daniel by chance. It had been engineered, patiently, over 8 months by Elena herself, working through her family's private equity arm under a name that traced back through 4 shell layers before it ever touched Marchetti. She had done it not to control him, not to own a piece of his success, but because she believed in him more than he believed in himself, and because some wounded, hopeful part of her still wanted, just once, to give someone everything without them knowing it came from her, to prove to herself that love could still be generous without needing credit. She never told him, not because she didn't trust him, because she was terrified, genuinely, quietly terrified, that if he knew, he would love the money before he loved her, the way everyone else always had. She had no idea that the silence she'd built to protect their love would be the very thing used to destroy it. Marcus is the kind of friend who laughed loudest at your jokes right up until the moment your success made his own feel smaller. He and Daniel had built the company together, technically, co-founders, equal titles on paper, but everyone in the room always knew whose vision it actually was. Marcus was good at spreadsheets and better at rooms, the kind of man who could make a boardroom like him in 4 minutes, but couldn't make an idea if his life depended on it. For years, that had been fine, comfortable even. Marcus got a salary and a title. Daniel got the credit. Nobody complained. Until Daniel started closing bigger rooms without him. It began small, a comment here, a joke with an edge to it there. Must be nice having a girlfriend who does your thinking for you, Marcus said once, only half joking, after Elena had spent an entire weekend quietly restructuring Daniel's pitch deck without either of them realizing how much of the eventual deal's success would trace back to those 3 days. Daniel laughed it off. Elena didn't. She recognized the tone. She'd heard it before, in other rooms from other people who smiled at her while measuring exactly how much space she was taking up that they believed belonged to them. When the $55 million deal began to take real shape, Marcus watched Daniel's name appear on drafts, on calls, on the deal memo itself, while his own name slid quietly down the page. And something curdled in him, not overnight, but the way milk turns, slow and invisible until the smell finally gives it away. He started spending more time with Daniel's mother, a woman who had never fully warmed Elena, not because of anything Elena had done, but because Elena had never once let herself be impressed by the family's rising status, and status-hungry people rarely forgive a person who won't play along. Marcus fed her doubts carefully, deliberately. Have you noticed how little we actually know about Elena's family? Doesn't it seem strange she's never once brought him to meet them? What is she hiding? It wasn't a lie, exactly. It was worse. It was a truth, aimed like a weapon. Quick task. If you are enjoying and believe stories like this deserve to be heard, like and subscribe to this channel. Thank you. Now back to the story. Then came Vivian. She arrived at a company mixer 3 weeks before the deal closed. Marcus's invitation, though he made it look accidental. Poised, radiant, dressed like money even when she had considerably less of it than she implied. She was attentive to Daniel in a way that flattered a man who had spent 6 years being loved quietly, and now, for the first time, wanted to be loved loudly. She asked him about his vision, his rise, his story, in a way that made him feel for the first time in his relationship like the main character of his own life, rather than a man someone else was quietly holding together from behind the curtain. Marcus watched it happen with something close to satisfaction. Every hour Daniel spent charmed by Vivian was an hour he spent further from the woman who, unknown to any of them, was the reason he had anything left to be charmed about. By the night of the deal's celebration, the plan had fully formed in the space between Marcus's ambition and Daniel's mother's pride. Paint Elena as small, as beneath the family's new station, as a woman with something to hide, and clear the path for Vivian and for Marcus to finally claim the recognition they believed had always belonged to them. They had no idea what they were about to destroy, or exactly whose hand had built the very floor they were standing on. Elena didn't cry until she got home. She sat on the same second-hand couch Daniel had helped her carry up 3 flights of stairs 6 years earlier in an apartment that suddenly felt enormous with just her in it. And she let herself feel, for the first time in longer than she could remember, exactly how tired she was. Not tired from the night, tired from 6 years of being loved in a way that required her to disappear a little more of herself every day to make room for it. Her phone buzzed, a text from her father. "Heard something happened tonight. Are you all right?" She stared at it for a long time before answering, "I will be." He didn't push. He never did. One of the strange mercies of a man who had spent her entire childhood not knowing how to be present and had spent her adulthood in overcorrection, refusing to ever crowd her. But she knew, the way you know weather is coming from the smell of the air, that this would not stay quiet. Her father's world was small at the top and loud in its silences. Someone would have already called him. Someone always did. She was right. 2 floors below the party that was, at that moment, still going, the champagne still being poured, Vivian's laugh still ringing a little too easily near Daniel's shoulder, Marcus still accepting congratulations meant for someone else's ex-girlfriend's quiet genius. Elena's father was already on the phone with the lead counsel who had structured the deal's final paperwork.
"Pull the shell entity's disclosure schedule," he said, his voice flat in the particular way that, to anyone who knew him, was far more dangerous than shouting. "I want to know exactly how much of tomorrow's closing depends on a signature this company doesn't know is mine." The lawyer went quiet for a moment. "Sir, if we pull that thread, the deal doesn't close without her name surfacing. There's no version of this where it stays hidden anymore." "Good," her father said. "It's been hidden long enough." The morning after, Daniel woke up in a suite that smelled like champagne gone flat, with a headache and a strange, hollow feeling he didn't examine too closely. Vivian had left sometime after 2. Marcus had toasted him 4 separate times. His mother had told him, right before she left, that he'd finally grown into himself. Everyone had told him exactly what he wanted to hear. Nobody had mentioned Elena's name once. He noticed, with the particular cruelty of a hangover, that the silence where she used to be felt less like relief and more like a missing tooth, a place his tongue kept returning to out of habit, expecting something that wasn't there anymore. At 9 a.m., his phone rang. Not Marcus, not his mother, a number he didn't recognize with a New York area code and a formality to the caller ID that made his stomach drop before he even answered. "Daniel Reyes, this is Whitmore & Co. on behalf of the Marchetti Group. We need you and your legal team in our offices this afternoon. There's a matter concerning the disclosure structure of yesterday's closing that requires immediate clarification." I'm sorry? The Marchetti Group? I don't have any dealings with. You will want to have your team present, Mr. Reyes. This concerns the origin of the capital behind your transaction. He sat very still on the edge of the bed, in the same room where less than 12 hours earlier he'd told the only woman who had ever loved him without wanting anything from him to get her things. Something cold moved through him. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself it was probably a formality, some routine compliance issue lawyers love to dramatize. He told himself several things on the drive downtown, none of which he believed by the time he reached the elevator. Marcus met him in the lobby, pale in a way Daniel had never seen on him before. "Did you know about this?" Daniel asked. "What?" Marcus said, too quickly. And Daniel, for the first time in 6 years of not paying close enough attention to the wrong things, noticed exactly how quickly. The conference room on the 41st floor was colder than the champagne had been the night before. At the head of the table sat a man Daniel had never met, but somehow instantly recognized. not from any photograph, but from the particular economy of his posture, the way powerful people sit when they have never once needed to perform strength for anyone. Beside him sat 2 lawyers, several sealed folders, and, unmistakably, a framed photograph turned face down on the table that no one had explained yet. "Mr. Reyes," the man said, "my name is Alessandro Marchetti. You don't know me, but you knew Elena very well until approximately 18 hours ago." Daniel's mouth went dry. I'm sorry, I don't understand." "Elena." Alessandro said the name simply, without theater, and somehow that made it land harder than any accusation could have. "Elena Whitfield Marchetti, my daughter, the woman you told to get her things." The room went very quiet. Marcus's face had gone the color of old paper. "That's not—" Daniel started. "Elena doesn't. She works in communications. She doesn't have anything to do with—" "She has everything to do with it," Alessandro said, and slid one of the sealed folders across the table. "Every introduction that built your first contract, every loan guarantee that kept your office open when you couldn't make rent, every single structural element of the transaction you celebrated last night traced back through 4 layers of holding entities specifically designed so that you would never have to know, to a single signature. Hers." Daniel opened the folder with hands that had gone unsteady. Page after page. Dates that matched moments he remembered. The loan that just came through. The supplier discount that felt like luck. The introduction to the lead investor that Daniel had always assumed was Marcus's doing. "She built this," Alessandro said quietly. "All of it. For you. And asked for nothing. Not credit, not equity, not even the truth to be known, because she wanted for once in her life to be loved for herself and not for what she could give someone. And you," his voice did not rise, which somehow made it worse, "you threw her out of a party paid for by her own quiet sacrifice in front of your mother and your business partner because a stranger in a red dress made you feel important." Daniel felt something break open in his chest, wide and sudden like ice giving way underfoot. "I didn't know," he said, and his voice cracked in exactly the way Elena's had the night before. "I swear to you, I didn't know." "No," Alessandro agreed. "You didn't, because she made sure of it. That was never your crime, Mr. Reyes." He leaned forward slightly. "Your crime was not needing to know who she was to decide she deserved better than the way you treated her. You just didn't." He turned to Marcus next, and something in his gaze sharpened. "As for you, my legal team has spent the morning reviewing communications between you and Mr. Reyes's mother over the past few weeks, encouraging doubt, introducing outside interest." He nodded once toward the door, where another lawyer stood waiting. "We'll be discussing your continued role in this company, separately, at length." Marcus said nothing. There was nothing left to say that would make it worse. Daniel left that building a different man than the one who'd walked in. He tried calling Elena 4 times before noon, straight to voicemail every time. Her recorded voice, warm, unguarded from some earlier version of a life that already felt impossibly far away, the only piece of her he could reach. He showed up at her apartment at 6 p.m. and stood outside the door of the building for 11 minutes before he found the courage to knock, rehearsing an apology that kept collapsing under its own weight every time he tried to finish it in his head. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Elena. It was her assistant, a young woman Daniel had never seen before in his life, who looked at him with the particular pity reserved for men who have finally understood something everyone else already knew. "She's not here," the woman said, not unkindly. "She left this morning. She said you might come by." "Where did she go?" "She didn't say. She did leave this, though." The woman handed him a single sealed envelope and closed the door before he could ask anything else. He read it on the sidewalk,
under a streetlight that flickered the way streetlights in movies never do, because reality, it turns out, doesn't dim on cue for anyone. Daniel, I spent 6 years hoping you would love me the way I loved you, without needing to know what I was worth to understand that I was worth something. I hid so much of myself because I was afraid of exactly what happened last night. I told myself the hiding was protecting us. I understand now it was only ever protecting me. I don't regret helping you. I would do it again, exactly the same way, asking for exactly nothing. That part was never about you owing me anything. But I am done being someone's secret and someone's shame in the same lifetime. I hope you build something real from what's left. I hope someday it isn't built on anyone's silence. Elena. He stood there a long time after he finished reading, long enough for the streetlight to flicker twice more, long enough to understand, fully, finally, far too late, exactly what he had thrown away, and exactly why no amount of 41-story conference rooms or sealed folders could hand it back to him. 6 months later, the story that circulated in certain circles of New York, never loudly, always in the particular hush reserved for old money discussing itself, was not about a boyfriend or a broken engagement or a $55 million deal at all. It was about Elena Whitfield Marchetti stepping, publicly, for the first time in her adult life, into her family's company, not as an heiress cutting ribbons, as the newly appointed head of a philanthropic investment division she designed herself, one built specifically to fund founders who had nothing, no connections, no capital, no family name to open doors. People, she said in the one interview she agreed to give, who deserved to be believed in without needing to prove they're worth the risk first. She bought a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, not because she needed the space, but because she wanted, for the first time, a home that reflected who she actually was, rather than who she was pretending to be. She reconciled, slowly and imperfectly, with her father, Sunday dinners that started stiff and grew over months into something that resembled the childhood neither of them had quite managed the first time. She kept exactly one photo from her 6 years with Daniel, tucked in a drawer rather than thrown away, because she had decided that erasing him would only be another form of hiding, and she was finished with all forms of that. Marcus's role at the company dissolved within weeks, quietly, the way these things do, when the money that made a room impressive suddenly remembers it can leave. He surfaces occasionally in industry circles, always a little smaller than he used to be, always slightly too eager to explain what happened, to people who have already decided they don't need the explanation. Vivian was gone before the ink on the scandal dried, having correctly calculated that a man under this much scrutiny was no longer the investment she'd taken him for. And Daniel kept the company, kept the deal, technically, though it took a full year of rebuilt trust with investors who had watched the story unfold and quietly wondered what else about him they didn't know. He built something real, eventually, in the way people sometimes do only after they've lost the thing that would have made building it painless. But he built it alone, in the particular quiet of a man who understands every single day exactly what his silence cost him, and exactly whose hands had been holding him up the entire time he thought he was standing on his own. He never remarried. He kept, framed on his desk where he would see it every morning, not a photo, but a single line, copied in his own handwriting from a letter he'd read 100 times under a flickering streetlight. I hope someday it isn't built on anyone's silence. Here is what this story is really about. Underneath the deals and the betrayals and the 41-story conference room where the truth finally sat down at the table. It is about the danger of loving people only for what they can visibly give you, and the deeper danger of hiding who you are so completely that the people who love you never get the chance to love the whole truth of you back. Elena hid her worth to protect her heart, and it cost her the very love she was trying to protect. Daniel measured his worth by rooms and deals and who was watching him rise, and it cost him the one person who had been quietly building the ground beneath his feet the entire time. And the villain of this story was never a stranger, never a monster in an obvious disguise. It was ordinary jealousy, ordinary insecurity, dressed up as ambition, standing far too close to people who should have known better. If there is one thing worth carrying out of a story like this, it's this. Pay attention to who stayed quiet through your hardest years. Pay attention to who was there before you had anything worth being there for. Because the people who love you the most rarely announce it loudly. Sometimes they build your entire future in silence and ask for nothing in return except the one thing that should have been easiest to give them all along, the simple decency of being believed in out loud when it mattered most. She walked into that ballroom as someone's secret. She walked out as no one's shame. And somewhere tonight, someone is quietly holding up a life they will never get credit for, not because they're waiting to be caught, but because they're hoping, against everything they've learned, that this time someone will finally choose to see them before the truth has to for them. Don't wait for the truth to force your hand. Choose to see people now while it still means something. Thanks for watching. This story was made and produced by Akavox, and don't forget to like and subscribe.